All right, I think we can get started now. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on community forestry. Thank you so much for joining us. So this is the last webinar on community forestry, but not the last webinar in the series. We have a few more sessions coming up that will focus on women's land rights. But for today, we will focus on how do we move forward in community forestry, given the last discussions that we've had over the last couple of weeks. So as usual, everyone is muted, but you're welcome to chat in the chat box, introduce yourselves and let us know where you're coming from. And in addition to that, you can customize your view to focus on the presentation or the presenter, and also use the Q&A tab to ask questions to the presenters. If you're unable to see the Q&A tab, please let me know, and also let me know if you can see all the questions that everyone else is posting there. And you can also, like I said, use the chat feature to send messages to everyone or to me as a host directly or to the other panelists. And so we look forward to an engaging discussion, and I will hand you over to our facilitator for today, Royd. Hi, Royd.
Hi, Chirombo. Thanks so much. And welcome everyone to the last of the webinars on community forest management. And again, like the last 3 weeks, we've been looking at a number of issues. We started by looking at the current status, then we are looking at how to scale up and the issues around enterprise development. And last week, we are looking at benefit sharing and enforcement. So today, what we are basically looking at is how do we move forward in ensuring that our activities on the ground begin to generate the desired impact that we are looking for. So in looking at that, we are going to first look at what are the enabling conditions needed for scaling up CFM to achieve the desired biodiversity conservation results. And this will be presented by Alistair. Then we shall also look at examples from other countries in terms of practical ways of strengthening CFMGs. Some of the success stories from countries who actually have moved miles ahead of us in terms of community forestry. And this was supposed to be presented by Tekla, but Tekla is engaged. So Sylvester will present this on on behalf of Tekla. Then we'll get the DFO's perspective from the Chipata stories to basically get a feel of what is happening on the ground in terms of these issues that we are looking at. And we'll leave sufficient time as usual for question and the answer session. And then we'll also try and open up the discussion to look at everything else. Where do we go as a nation from this point onwards? As indicated in the concept note that we sent earlier on to all of you was that this is supposed to culminate into a workshop, an in-person workshop, depending on the conditions on the ground. So we'll keep monitoring what is happening on the ground, hoping the COVID situation improves, and then we shall communicate when we can do that. So to start off our discussion for today is there will be a presentation from Alistair. I already introduced Alistair, but in case there are those who have just joined today, Alistair is currently with ZIFU, where he's the guru of community forestry management implementation there. But prior to that, Alistair has a vast experience in Southern Africa, coming from Botswana, Malawi, and more recently, he was the chief technical advisor for decentralized forests and other natural resources management project, which was funded by the Finnish government in Muchinga and the Northwestern province. So he has a wealth of experience that we shall learn from this presentation that is actually going to make in the next few seconds. Alistair, the floor is yours, please.
Great, Royd. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everyone again. And again, it's a pleasure to be part of this experience sharing series. And I just hope that I can share some insights from my experience to help move forward the process in Zambia. So this afternoon, I want to highlight some what I see as critical issues that are key to achieving sustainable forest and biodiversity conservation between, importantly, people and the forest environment. And if we want to scale up, we need to make sure that we perfect our practice. And I think that's part of what our discussions have been over the last few weeks. So just based on my, trying to get my to work here. Here we go. Yeah, based on some experiences I have in CBNRM over the last 25 years, I'd like to present a framework that I think that helps capture what are the key enabling conditions for participatory biodiversity conservation. So I see as the first one that communities need the authority, and that is the secure legal and economic rights to the resources that we're asking them to manage. They also need the ability, that is the knowledge and skills, for sustainable forest management or sustainable management of any natural resources. Then importantly, they need the incentive, and that says they have receive a sufficient return on investment of effort in the management and protection of their forest or other natural resources. So these have been seen as the three main ones that have led or driven the CBNRM process. I would add in from my own experience, equity. It's a small word, but it's got a very, very big meaning. And here we're looking at fair treatment, fair reward for a fair contribution, and this also relates to the relationships between different groups of power and accountability, between groups and also within groups, and I'll touch on this in a bit more detail as we go through the presentation. So in my view, these four elements are key if we're going to support people's involvement in the conservation of biodiversity in the country, and I'll go through now in a bit more detail. So in terms of authority, we touched on this in the first of the presentations, that we have a good enabling environment in Zambia with the Forestry Act and also the Community Forestry Regulations of 2018. And these all then set the scene for this legal transfer of rights. We also, not forgetting the Zambian Wildlife Act, also brings in community management of natural resources. And then in the Urban Regional Planning Act of 2015 also emphasizes the need for involvement of communities in decision-making over development activities in their area. Also, the National Strategy to Reduce Deforestation and Forest Degradation, again, highlights the importance of community involvement in natural resources, also the National Policy on Climate Change. And importantly, I think in terms of a multi-sectoral approach, the National Development Plan has also highlighted the importance of communities in sustainable development. And actually, sustainable forest management and the number of community forest management groups are one of the or two of the indicators in the National Development Plan. And I think I emphasized in my first presentation was that these emphasize that community forestry as an approach is not a project. It's a strategy of government to help address some of the issues that are very important in the country. We're also very fortunate that practitioners in helping this, excuse me, can be guided by a process. There's a process which helps take the practitioners through and the communities through the steps needed to receive their rights to natural management of natural resources. And this is from community engagement, identifying areas, forming groups, being recognized under the legal framework, developing management plans, rules, and then finally entering into an agreement with the Director of Forest in case of forests. And we have there's a set of national guidelines for those who would like information on how this can be done step by step. So what's important is that there's a legal agreement that gives the authority to communities to manage the natural resources. And as it says on the document, here there is an agreement to transfer management authority of forest resources to communities, and that they will take responsibilities for the same. So this is important because it's a transfer of management authority to communities. It also highlights the area that this authority applies to, and also the measures that are put in place in terms of rules to protect these areas. So basically, this is critical, really. I would see in terms of the authority. At the end of the day, if there's no legal agreement, there is no legal authority to manage the resources on these open areas. It also gives the authority for protecting the areas. There's authority for law enforcement, and we discussed last week on the law enforcement issue that they're also supported to manage areas outside the community forest areas through the process of identifying and having members of their communities appointed as honorary forest officers. So that allows them the authority to protect their assets in their community. Now, the second one, ability, is another key aspect. They need the knowledge and skills to manage the forests. There is knowledge of the forest, but what is important that they have the knowledge to manage these resources in a collective and sustainable way. And the process of community forestry supports that. So that there's a plan for management, a plan for protection, and a plan for control of the forest. They also then, as part of that ability, need to understand what is sustainable, what are the limits, what are the immediate needs versus longer term needs, and reconciling those two pressures and priorities. And I think the view of, in my experience, the view of communities over natural resources changes when they have the legal rights to these resources, that they are more likely, more inclined to protect and manage if it's theirs. And so what we need to ensure that there is capacity to manage, capacity to control, the capacity to issue permits, collect revenue, and account for that revenue in a good way. And also the knowledge of the legal powers and procedures for law enforcement that we discovered we covered last week. The third area, as I highlighted, is incentive, and such that they have a sufficient return on investment of effort in their protection and management of resources. And I think this is definitely enabling here in Zambia. And the agreement that they sign with the Director of Forestry in terms of community forestry is very explicit, and actually this is quite unique in many countries involved in community forestry, that they can actually issue permits and collect revenue for the products and uses provided for in the agreement they have with the Director of Forestry. The other very enabling aspect of the Zambian legislation is also they have the ability to collect and retain revenue from fines as they do their law enforcement. So that's an incentive for them to get involved in law enforcement activities. But through incentive, it's very important that communities need to see the value from their forest if they're going to support biodiversity conservation. And if they need to capture that value and have access to sustainable markets. And if that is not available, then they'll look to convert their forests into other income generating activities, more productive activities. So value is critical. And I highlighted, I think, in my first of the series of presentations, that if we neglect that value aspect, then we could lose the investment in effort in protecting the forest areas. And in Tanzania, they're looking at this and they're calling it the second generation of participatory forest management for local economic development. So I think that's a warning for our practice here in Zambia. Now that incentive also covers in terms of payment for resources, but what happens with the money? We touched on this a bit last week, that people need to, the incentive needs to be broadly understood, not just by the executive committees, but also the wider communities, that any benefits come in, revenues come in, how they are shared, how it benefits them as a community, but also as an individual, because now we're really all together in an income-based society. So people really want to see value from their forest areas. So incentive is very an important consideration. As I said, equity, it's a small word with a very big issue, and we need to see equity in relationships. So between our community groups with government, is that an equitable relationship? We need to see that their relationship with their traditional leaders, how is that? Their relationship with their constituent user groups, the user groups of the forests, because ultimately these are the households and rights holders who've got access. So managing these relationships and the dynamics in these relationships is very critical. And also with their excuse me, also with their service providers, with the district forest staff. I'll just give you an insight of that. When under decentralized forests, when we were working in Kasempa, and we started engaging communities, and they actually were very explicit. They said, if you just come to us as forestry, we'd be very suspicious. But now that we see that there are other players, other sectors involved, with community development, with agriculture, district planning officers, etc., they could see that no, this was something. So it was about building up trust. So relationships between different groups and different service providers are quite critical to understand, be they from government or not from government. Then how benefits are shared equitably within the communities and outside with traditional leaders. Who gets how much is a critical issue, and that can, if that is not clearly understood, can undermine much of the investment processes. So all these aspects together really need to be considered if what we're doing is going to be sustainable. I'd just like to look a bit more depth at that, because it is so critical to getting this right and understanding the power and accountability issues of initiatives that we're working with or we're setting up. And in terms of power, the powers that have been given to some of these new institutions are quite wide-ranging. They have a decision-making, executive powers, deciding who has access to the resources. They are making rules and bylaws. They have the power of sanction. These are very, very important powers, but they must be handled very, very sensitively. They also have the powers over resource availability in allocating resources for their work plans, allocating tasks to people, and also their powers now extend over a defined area of forest. So their geographical powers, and also how long have they got the powers for. So these elements are and how these powers are applied are really critical to ensuring sustainability and upscaling of what we're trying to do. As I say, these are balanced by measures of accountability, and accountability really can be measured in, are people participating in this initiative? Are people being consulted in this initiative? Are the activities that are taking place being reported? What's going on? Because otherwise there can be much suspicion. Is there awareness and understanding? But is there also the power of sanction to these new committees? What is the term of office? If someone does something wrong, how does it apply? So from my experience, these aspects are critical. How powers are applied, how accountability the community representative groups are to their wider community. I'd just like to give a brief sort of overview of why this is important. I did a study on decentralization in forestry in Malawi, and that's the process of devolving powers to communities over natural resources. So to properly understand what was going on, we held community meetings, and we talked about these elements of power, and we're basically building up an image of institutional mapping of different institutions at community level, and asking about the amount of power and the amount of accountability these institutions have over them as a community. And we could build up this picture of what was going on. And this is quite fascinating, just highlighting the CFMGs that we have in Zambia. They're like BNRMCs in Malawi. And here in this particular community, we could see that the community, the CFMG really didn't have, was quite remote from the community compared to other community level institutions. And while they had a good relationship, the institution had a good relationship with the district forestry staff, it wasn't so clear with the communities. And what we learned from this is that the CFMG was acting like a club, not as an accountable community institution. So that raised alarm that we assume sometimes that these institutions and processes are for everyone in the community, when actually sometimes they're captured and managed by a few. And in another site, we did a similar exercise. We did this over quite a number of sites, but I just wanted to highlight a few areas. And here, for example, the CFMG here, the community said they had a lot of power over them because of all the new rules and the sanction, but they weren't very accountable to the community. And while the CFMG said they were getting a very good service from the district forestry extension staff, you could see the relationship between the community and the extension staff was not really there at all. So that's a learning that really we need to ensure that we understand who has rights to resources, who should be involved, and if they're not involved, we should ensure that they do become involved, because at the end of the day, if we want sustainable management and conservation of natural resources, we really do need consensus and collective action. So how do we actually measure this? Because I'm saying that these aspects of power and accountability and how institutions are functioning are really fundamental to what we're trying to do in terms of sustainable management and conservation of natural resources. So there are a number of tools and approaches we can follow. And actually, they're a requirement, because in the agreement, in the Community Forest Management Agreement, it actually states quite explicitly that the CFMG shall represent and be accountable to the community of the villages specified in the agreement. So that really says that it's for all the people, all the households of the villages where the community forestry is taking place. And also in terms of the management of resources and benefits from the forest area, it actually explicitly says that it should be equitably utilized by the community in accordance with their agreed benefit sharing arrangements. So this is really important. We need to really ensure that the resources are well managed, that any revenues or benefits are collected are properly accounted for and shared according to their agreement, and that people are benefiting through this improved management of natural resources. So really, we see this as part of the regulatory monitoring, ensuring that the government policies and strategies and approaches for community forestry, that the agreements that are signed with the Director of Forestry are properly applied and implemented. So what we've done in practice is we've held meetings in the communities And what we do is we split into 3 groups. So one group goes off into the forest area, the community forest area, and you can soon pretty clearly early see whether it's being managed well or not. A second group then sits with the institution, the community forest management group, and looks at their record keeping, how many permits have been issued, how much money has been collected, how that money has been used, distributed, shared, and reported. And then lastly, and highly critical, is that the team goes out into the community to find the people that haven't come to the meetings, that may not be involved directly, to understand, do you know about the CFMG? Do you know what they're doing? Do you know, are they collecting money? That money, what are they doing with it? And making sure that, as I say, people who might not be directly involved in the meetings are their voices are heard, and importantly, marginalized groups as well. So these elements of looking at the forest condition, the governance and functioning and accountability and transparency of the institution, as well as the wider understanding and participation by the community in the initiative, is really key to, I would say, to sustainable management and sustainable involvement of our communities. I would just like to highlight again some of the challenges we have, and some of the opportunities, and particularly of this information that we have recently in Eastern Province. And I think it probably relates to most areas of the country, but are learning that almost half the emissions from greenhouse gases in the province are coming from forest areas. That's degradation of forest areas, and then about 16% from the forest loss to agriculture. So really, this says that there's really an urgency for action. We should be concerned about our climate change, and our practitioners, we need to be aware of this. So we use this information that we can apply it, raise concern of our other policymakers, decision makers, planners, particularly at the district level when you're planning district service provision. Unfortunately, there's still a perception that if we plant trees, that we're going to address these greenhouse gas emission issues, where in fact we can see that the majority of the emissions are coming from existing forests that are being degraded. So please use this sort of information and use the policy documents to highlight that the importance of upscaling and covering as much area of possible in the country is really an urgent priority. And I would also emphasize again that our protected areas, our national and local forests, are huge areas, and they're hugely at risk. And some of these emissions that are coming from within the province are coming from our protected forest areas. And while the regulations say that our community forestry can be applied in local forests, unfortunately the practice is not really there, or I'm not aware of it being applied in many of the protected forest areas in the country. So this is why that we're trying to pilot this and therefore then mainstream it and highlight that our local forests really are there for local needs. And if they're there for local needs, we need to understand what are the local issues, and we need to, with the local stakeholders who live around these forest areas, get them involved to develop local solutions. So as I say, our healthy forest ecosystems act as a carbon storage, but unfortunately they're being degraded, and unfortunately our forest ecosystems really now hang in the balance. So what we do today and what we do with the tools and approaches available to us can really make a difference. How we take up and apply and promote and bring as a large an area as possible under sustainable management really depends on the efforts that we take today and tomorrow. So I'd just like to wrap up with saying that these four elements, from my view of authority, ability, incentive, and equity, are fundamental if we want to ensure that we have people's participation fully in biodiversity conservation in the country. And I would just like to end with that, is asking this question: what will be your role and what is your contribution to make this happen? Thank you.
Many thanks, Alistair, for that wonderful presentation with a lot of mind-provocative issues in it. Okay, so many thanks. And Alistair he has an engagement just at 14 hours. So like last week, he will not be with us. So in order to just facilitate the question and answer session for his particular presentation, we'll open up that particular session. I haven't seen any questions in the panel yet, but you can please raise up your hand. There is provision for you to raise up your hand and we'll definitely get to you. Anybody to go first? Or even a comment or a clarification, you are welcome. Okay, looks like it was a crystal clear presentation. But
maybe I put everyone to sleep.
Yeah? No. Because I've already seen a comment. Yeah, thanks for simple and punchy, well elaborated presentation. Yeah, but maybe the question, Alistair, is are we getting there as a nation so far? 3 years down the implementation of CFM. From your own experience in Chipata, Northwestern Province, Northwestern and Muchinga, where are we getting things wrong in order to reach where you have just presented to us?
Great, thanks, Roy. I think there's a number of aspects on that. Is that really it comes down to the district level. At the district level, the analysis of which areas are at risk, which areas really need to be targeted. I think it's no longer acceptable just to have one or two small community forest management groups in any one district. That really is, as I highlighted, this is not a pilot, it's not a project, it's a government policy to address both development and climate change issues. And there needs to be an assessment really in every area of how much land is still not under a sustainable management system. And therefore then what is the appropriate approach to bring that area under a sustainable management system. And that's why I'm highlighting that the protected forest area, our local and national forests really need that investment. And if 45, nearly 50% of the emissions, this is just in Eastern Province, are coming from existing forest areas, then we need to look at how much area is under sustainable management. For example, I think there's like 2.5 million hectares of forest in Eastern Province, yet mainly only about 700,000 hectares are under direct management. So then the question is, what's happening in the remaining areas? So I think each area, each district, each province needs to look inward and see how much are you doing, how much can be done, and who's going to help you with that. And then if that takes place, then I think we can make a difference. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Alistair. Then the other question is, I've seen a question here which deals with how do you combat corruption? It's not complete, but I want to believe that the thinking behind this question is coming from an identified source, but it's a web conference, and that's what it is coming through. So, I mean, I think the idea behind this question is corruption can actually disrupt everything that you may be doing under community forest, especially as the benefits begin to flow into these communities. So how do we combat corruption under such circumstances?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think that's a critical issue, and the way that is countered is by having as many open and transparent processes as possible, and from the outset highlighting who this is for, who should be involved, and any committees that we support the establishment of. The constitution is critical. The reporting is critical, and those slides I put up about power and accountability. If we don't address these issues, then we set the scene for corruption. But if we ensure from day one that all the right people are involved, that there is open and transparent processes, we'll have more accountable institutions. And if they're more accountable, then there's less opportunity for corrupt practices to take place. What I would say in my experience so far with the community forestry is that some of those aspects of the community forest management agreement, where it says that the benefits should be shared equitably, it says that reports should be prepared and shared, that the accounts should be available for inspection by the Director of Forestry or his or her representative. That really needs to be enforced. But if we walk away and we leave the fledgling institutions to do their own thing, then again that's a breeding ground for corruption. So it's really up to the district forest officials to ensure that what has been entered into with the director is actually applied, and then the conditions are more favorable for not having corruption. Thank you.
Many thanks, Alistair. So if we follow it up from what you've just explained, one of the preconditions to achieve biodiversity conservation is that there must be ability. But I want to believe that this ability must be at both levels, community as well as the community of practice, forest department, NGOs promoting community forest and so forth. Now, from your own experience so far, do we see this ability being available at both levels, at community level and also people who are promoting this scaling up of community forests?
Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag, really. There are people who are really interested in this and understand it and promote it, and there are others who don't. That's just human nature.
Okay.
I think the main thing is accountability, not just to the new institution, but accountability of the service providers and accountability of the district forestry staff also. And I raised this issue of is one community forestry group in your district, is that sufficient? Have you achieved what you've your mandate if you've only got one group? So the information is there, the practice is there. I think the first session when Tekla presented that we've now got a wealth of experience across the provinces, and then sessions like this will help. But I think accountability is key to me. Thank you.
Many thanks. Okay, so His Royal Highness Chief Mkovere, your hand has been up for a while. Apologies, but please go ahead and ask the question or clarification or comment. Chirombo, kindly unmute His Royal Highness. Your Highness, if you can click on
Okay, I can't seem to.
but he's able to unmute himself, isn't it?
Yes, he should be able to unmute himself. I've sent him a prompt.
Okay, so if you can click where there's a mic there, it should be able to unmute you. Please proceed, Your Highness.
Okay, he's unmuted now.
Yeah. Can't you proceed, Your Royal Highness? Okay, so as Our Royal Highness is preparing to ask, possibly we can move to Haggai. I think there's a little bit of a problem where he is.
Hello, good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Hello, Prof, can you hear me?
I can, yes, please.
All right. So I think my question is on, I've seen those 4 components where we have ability, authority, equity, and incentive. So I just wanted to find out how realistic is it to promote that incentive component for the government-led community forest projects without any donor support?
Okay, that's a very difficult one, but I'll ask Alistair first to go. Alistair, what's your view?
Yeah, thanks for that. Well, this process that is in the poster there and the national guidelines, those were developed under the support of the Decentralized Forest and Other Natural Resources Management Program funded by the Finnish government. And Professor Vinya and myself were part of that. And our aim when we developed this was to make it as simple as possible, such that it doesn't need a high investment of resources to make it happen. It's just unfortunate that the practice has been that to conduct community meetings, you need to take a lot of incentives along. And that is just, I think that's a failure of the development community. So it's how to do this in a good way without it being high resource requirement. And I think if there is a good understanding between the communities and the practitioners of that, and the communities see the need, they'll be willing to do this just with technical support. Yeah. I think from my experience in Northwestern Province, where there was a lot of land pressures, land was being given up and lost. There's a lot of incomers coming in, be they foreign, be they from other parts of the country. So people were seeing their traditional lands shrinking, and as soon as a piece of land was allocated to someone or a concession holder or a mine, then they had lost access to that piece of land. So the demand was quite high, and I think if you have those sort of conditions, people will be willing to just take the advice without all the frills, and therefore it can be done with quite a low incentive. I would say that for good and for bad, the REDD+ projects, the carbon financing has generated a lot of interest in community forestry. And as I said, that can be good or bad. If the financing is sustainable, then it's for good. But I think yeah, there's no real one reason. But if people really see the need and they want to protect the resources, they will do this without having a lot of external incentives. Thank you.
Yeah, just in addition also, the basic idea, if you followed the earlier presentations, what we emphasize was one of the challenges is that there's failure by the DFO's offices to basically begin to internalize community forestry as a government program. So it's still running as a government, as a project rather than as a government program, because this is well defined in the policy and then there's the legislation. So it's possible if we can begin to internalize this budget for this work plan for community forests, we'll begin to see that incentives can actually be established. Okay, I'm not sure if we are able to get Your Royal Highness again, but there's a question, not really a question, there's a comment first. It says, my fear is that programs, donors, etc., are incentivized to help communities establish community forest management, but not to make sure that those communities have the support to be successful in the long run. Building the capacity for everyone, CFM with a lifetime of work, backstopping support, and I fear that there are not enough resources to adequately support the ones that we have. So this is a comment. I think it resonates with what Haggai just asked. So I probably will leave it there. Your Royal Highness are able to get us now and able to put forward your question or comment. Okay, so it seems we can't get back to Your Royal Highness. So I think okay, Rolf just asked the last one, anyway, we have to close this session. If a community forest is degrading, can we conclude that one or more of the 4 principles are, I'm sure you wanted to say, not working? Alice, I want to come first. Hello, Alice, are we still with you or you have disappeared?
Yeah, no,
okay.
No, I'm still here. Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
No, I think that's, I just caught the end of the question. Yeah, I think this provides a good framework for understanding the causes of the degradation. Is it elite capture? Is it that people seeing they're not getting the value that they expected from the forest area? Do they feel that it doesn't belong to them? They don't have the rights. Perhaps they don't have the knowledge and skills to know what is sustainable and not sustainable. So I think, yes, this is a useful framework to use for analyzing the reasons for a forest being degraded, and then what steps and measures can be taken to reverse that. Thank you.
Okay, many thanks, Alice. The last question is from Elizabeth. In regards to the questions that you're asking, you ask crucial questions in your presentation, highlighting some of the issues needing answers as way forward. How easy can an individual or at household level that is not part of any user group or CFMGs benefit? There are guidelines to those in authority to allow community members into these structures. She basically observed in one of the Kasempa CFM area where many people wanted to join, but they seem not to know how. Do you have Winbird from FD here? But you can try, Alistair, to answer that, since you are part and parcel of the FMD, FD, direct or indirect. I don't see big banners from FD here.
Okay, I think I'll touch on this, but I think my colleague Titus Kabonso will probably touch on this also in his presentation at the end of this session today. But that says to me that there was a bit of a failure or gap in the initial steps of the process, the awareness raising sessions to understand and communicate who should be involved, and then also at the point of identifying the area, because when you identify the area, you should also understand who are the people that have a customary right to that area, because they should be involved as well. And then the understanding when the institution is formed and elections take place. So if a member of the community, a household, felt that they were excluded, it meant that perhaps the quality of some of those steps was not done so well. And I think that's why I wanted to put up those power accountability diagrams from an assessment in Malawi, because that then shows that the institution is a club. It's not there for everyone. It's a membership club.
Mm.
And that's something that we try and tackle, saying, well, it's your members are not just the people that turn up to the meetings. The statutory instrument is quite clear, and the Forestry Act is that it's there for the wider community. And so practitioners really need to make sure that is properly understood, and we're not just promoting clubs and a few people to capture resources. Because what I have seen is when that happens, you get conflicts. And when you get conflicts, you get resource destruction. I saw fires and other activities taking place because people felt excluded. So I think my colleague Titus Kabonso will touch on this in a bit more later in this session. Thank you. But thanks, Elizabeth. For that. Thanks, Elizabeth, for the question.
Okay, many thanks, Alistair. We have to release you now. It's only 4 minutes before your appointment. But you kindly share your email address. There's a request to have your email address so that people can direct communicate with you, if that is fine with you.
Yeah, great. I'm happy for that to be shared. Thanks. The
Okay.
ZIFO one. Yep. Many
thanks, and we wish you all the best in your monitoring exercise. And it was lovely and a wonderful time to have you on this webinar. We'll definitely continue at our level communicating. So enjoy your day.
Great. Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Bye now.
Bye-bye. Okay, so we are now going to move to the next presentation, which is basically looking at how our friends have done it in other countries to ensure that these CFMGs, basically as they were scaling up, they were also strengthening these CFMGs to an extent. I mean, the expectation is that when you form these groups, eventually these groups must be able to operate without your presence. In other words, they should be able to have self-mobilization identity among themselves and should be able to undertake activities without seeing a donor vehicle or a project vehicle or a JRZ vehicle driving in, and that's when they can congregate. So how have our friends done it in other countries? So we'll look at practical ways of strengthening community forest management groups, success stories from other countries. And this will be presented by the Conservator of Forest at Forest Department Headquarters, Mr. Sylvester Siame. Sylvester, unlike Alistair, of course, is quite young, but he has quite some experience in forest management. So he has experience from Eastern Province where he worked. That was his first appointment. And now he's been relocated to the Forest Department, headquarters in Lusaka. He has slightly over 10 years experience in his forest management activities. Sylvester, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Vinya, and good afternoon, everyone. Like mentioned, my name is Sylvester Siame. I'm from Forest Department Headquarters. Basically, we'll make a presentation on how we can we can strengthen CFMGs through various practical ways. So my presentation basically will cover just a brief historical background of where we are coming from within the continent of Africa with regard to community forestry. And also we'll just try to highlight why a CFM might work out and possibly highlight some of the conditionalities that can make a CFM successful, riding on some of the conditions that were already presented by Alistair. And also we'll try just to share some success stories from 3 selected countries within Africa that have been pioneering participatory forest management in the various models, and also try to see how we can bring out certain practical ways which we might use as a country to strengthen our CFMGs or our CFM processes within the country. And basically, I'll just conclude. So as a way of beginning my presentation, I would just like to share just a very brief background of where we're coming from as Africa in terms of community forestry management. So you realize that community forest management is basically dating way back like in the 1980s, which we have been implementing in various countries. And since then, around 1990s, we had about 35 countries that had enacted the regulations in terms of the laws and the policies that encompassed the community forest management or participatory forest management, as it were. So you realize that within this time period around 1998, we had a forestry policy of 1998, which basically also within the context of Zambia brought out the issues of participatory forest management. So most of the countries actually had their laws revised, and also policies that also tried to take into account the need for participatory forest management. And around 2002, a number of countries, close to 30 countries or more, had actually started undertaking community forest management with about 100 projects. So in terms of what these models, in terms of the CFM models that were being implemented in the various parts of the continent, they were trying to address basically three main objectives, which were revolving around the issues to do with enhancing community engagement in forest management. You realize that forest management by communities has been done even in the past, even before these models were brought on board. But there was a need to enhance this community engagement in forest management, to formalize the way forest management can be done. So that's one of the objectives that most of the models we are trying to speak to. And also the issue of poverty. I think you are aware that a number of forest-dependent communities or communities that live in or around the forest resources have quite a significant high level of poverty. And it was felt that once these models are brought on board, they will try to address the issues of rural poverty and possibly from the various benefits and goods and services that may be derived from communally managed forests. This might try to help in reducing rural or household poverty. And also key to the CFO models is also the issues of trying to promote forest conservation, basically to try and see how best these communities can also get involved in the conservation of forests. So basically, the introduction of community forests in Africa, we are centered around addressing these main objectives that I've just highlighted. So then why CFM might work, or what are some of the key factors that may actually help us to see community forest management work out in the context of the country, basically in Zambia. So it was mentioned from the previous presentation that there are certain biophysical factors or factors that are related to, for example, forest conditions, and also factors that are related to basically the general landscape morphology of that particular area. So this can actually help us to have a workable community forest management model, because you realize that the forest conditions vary significantly from one area to the other. And if you want to make a workable CFM model, it is important to take into account the biophysical factors, basically in terms of the forest conditions, and the other biophysical factors related to the forests. The issue of demography also is very critical to ensuring that we have a CFM which is workable, in the sense that the population dynamics around those areas that we are targeting to implement our community forest management is very critical, because there are a number of benefits, maybe, for example, that may be derived from those pieces of land. And as such, we need to take into account the demographics in terms of the population size and also the population growth within that area, to also understand the possible future implications in terms of the demographics of that area. So that will help us to have a very workable community forest management. The issues also on to do with economic factors is also very critical, in the sense that we need to understand the economic tangible and non-tangible benefits that the communities are deriving from such kind of an area where we are trying to implement, and also some of the income activities, generating activities that the communities are engaged in. This will help us subsequently also try to develop viable forest-based enterprises if we know the economic factors around those areas where we're trying to implement CFM. Otherwise, without a clear understanding of the economic factors that surround the areas that we are targeting, it might be difficult to develop a viable forest-based enterprises that will be able to support the communities. This is important in the sense that it also helps us to create certain incentives that may be able to be derived to help the community these forest areas. The issues of institutional factors, I think, was also mentioned in the previous presentation. The issues of the various institutions, both at local and the government level, that are involved in the management, or that have a stake in the management of the various forest resources in a particular area that we are targeting, is also very critical. We have, I think, existing institutional structures that are at a local level. For example, we have the traditional leaders, as well as the other institutions that are present at local level. Those need to be taken into account as we are trying to develop, or as we are trying to roll out community forest management. The issues of social political factors as well need to be taken into account, so that we know the social dynamics within the areas that we are trying to operate. And also, last but not the least, we also need to ensure that there is external recognition from both government and also the other stakeholders or partners that are engaged in the rolling out of community forest management. So basically, these are some of the areas that might help us to particularly see how best community forest management can work out in a particular area. Just to ride on what was presented also by Alistair, there are also certain conditionalities that may help us to make CFM successful. There have been a review in the past of what conditionalities may help us to meet CFM. And one of the conditionalities that have been identified is the issue of secure land tenure. I think we are all aware that issues of community forest also entails giving out certain pieces of forest for the purposes of community forest management. So it is important to ensure that this is taken into consideration. The issues of having enabling regulatory framework, I think, as Alistair was presenting under one of the conditions that he had mentioned on the issues of ability, he labored to actually mention that the issues of regulatory framework are very critical in ensuring that the CFM process is rolled out successfully. And also the issues of governance in terms of the governance structures that are available, and also viable technologies in terms of what technologies are we trying to introduce, for example, to the local communities that are involved in community forest management. It is important to ensure that those technologies are very viable and are able to be sustained by the communities. I think in the one of the webinars that was done by one of our colleagues from Chisali, Mr. Chongo, I think had mentioned that I think it should be Mr. Kavoso, where it was mentioned that it's important that we look at what livelihoods are we promoting to the local communities that will be viable for them to also marry to the issues of community forest management. It is also important to have a well-articulated well-articulated market knowledge in terms of the various products and services that community forest management areas are generating for the communities to be able to realize adequate resources that would also help subsequently in management of those forest areas that they are managing. There is also need to have some supportive bureaucracy in terms of the governance structures and the government support from the government side and also other partners. So in terms of the success stories, there are a number of African countries that have pioneered community forest management in the past, and they have recorded a significant amount of successes. So I'll just try to share a few success stories from 3 selected countries in Africa, starting with Gambia in West Africa, Tanzania in East Africa, and I'll end with Ethiopia, and possibly try to see how we can learn or how we can pick lessons from these success stories that our colleagues have recorded in terms of rolling out community forest management, how we can tap in those success factors and also try to emulate and possibly internalize within the context of our country. So we'll begin with looking at the Gambian scheme. In terms of community forest management in Gambia, I think it's a flagship of the forest policy of 1995, which the country had put in place, and the Act of 1998, which was within, I think, the same timeline that we also tried to revise our Forest Act around that time. So the pertinent issues that came out from this scheme in terms of community forest management in Gambia is that, like our case is, Gambia has no specific limit in terms of the area that can be set aside for community forest management. So there is no prescription in terms of the area size, and also this area is also attributed for life once it is designated or recognized as a community forest management area. This is basically designated to be as such for life. And also one pertinent issue also that is important to note within the context of the Gambian scheme is that the management aspect is also based on a 5-year management plan. So that's like our case is, when we develop community forest management, these are based on 5-year management plans that are basically try to outline what management regimes will be put in place within those forest management areas. And these are approved also by the Forest Administration, and also they are revised every year. So there are quite a number of identified success elements within the Gambian scenario. So I'll just try to highlight some of the key elements that relate to the success of the community forest management in the Gambia. So one of them being that there was quite a significant amount of community demand for community control over forest over the years. So there was a lot of demand coming from the community, realizing that once they are involved in the management of the forest, from where they get a number of benefits, it would be helping them to actually deal with the issues of poverty, and also continuously have other services that they derive from the forest. One of the key elements also that led to the success of the Gambian scheme is the issue of appropriate policy and legislation. Just like we have currently, we have the supporting legislation and policy that clearly spells out the need for us to engage in community forestry. Also, Gambia rode on that key element to actually have a successful CFM implemented. Also, the communities that were engaged in community forests also had established community forest associations where a number of community forestry groups come together and form an association with the core mandate of trying to iron out the issues of community forestry from the various locations that they are situated, and also try to use these platforms as a platform for sharing best practices and ideas on how best they can make improvement and learn from others that are doing better. So this played a very critical role in ensuring that Gambia's community forestry is a success. They also had a very phased approach in terms of introducing CFM to the communities, just our case has been. I think we saw from the previous presentation that as a country from the National Guidelines on Community Forest Management, we have those phased steps that we undertake. But suffice to mention that despite the fact that we have this phased approach, it should not work out as a once-off activity, because certain phases will require quite significant amounts of time, especially in the Zambian context, where we have the first step of raising awareness and also initiating some interest from the communities. So this approach also helped the Gambian country to record a lot of success, because within the various phases that were involved in introducing community forest management, there was quite significant amount of learning by doing, where they learned a lot of lessons as they proceeded in the subsequent phases. And also the issue of participation that was done through empowerment, where participants were empowered with various livelihood activities that were identified to be existing within the confines of those communities, helped to also record a significant amount of success, in the sense that they were just trying to build upon the existing livelihoods which were being undertaken by the communities. There was also one key element that has been documented to be an enabler to the success of the Gambian scenario, which was to do with the issues of collaboration. I think it is important that at local and also at national level, there is quite significant amount of collaboration amongst the various actors, be it government and other institutions that are engaged in community forest management. So this also contributed immensely to the success of Gambia. And also the institutional arrangement in terms of the way the institutions are arranged at local and also at different levels. So this also played a role in ensuring that the rolling out of CFM in the country was successful. The issue of incentives, which was already mentioned during the discussion, was also very critical, in the sense that within the Gambian context, they have documented that there should be minimum external incentives, because the overdependence on external incentives by communities actually lead to lack of sustainability, where communities will still want to be waiting for external incentives for them to continue with their CFM activities. So this was very, very critical, and also is very critical to our Zambian context, in the sense that as it is now, we know that community forest management is enshrined in the Forest Act, and as such, it should be one of the key activities that the Forest Department and the forestry sector in general is supposed to be undertaking as an activity and not as a project. So the issue of incentives actually comes in handy in terms of how best to do it, incentivize the communities in order to ensure that they are also able to be sustained even without project support. So this is very, very critical, and it is documented that it's one of the key elements that led to the successful implementation of CFM in Gambia. And also, most critical is the issue of also capacity building at both community level and the forest department in that country levels. So capacity building is actually very critical in ensuring that the communities have the adequate capacity together with the implementing or supporting department, so that the CFM agenda is pushed forward with a lot of capacity. So these are the key elements that led to the successful implementation of the community forest management in Gambia. Now, writing on this, where then do we come in, or how then do we draw practical examples in terms of strengthening our Zambian context CFMG capacity? So we are proposing that from what we have learned from the Gambian success story, we would be able to, first of all, enhance the capacity of our CFMGs in the various aspects. One of the aspects being the fact that, for example, the current CFMGs are already, some of them are already receiving monies in form of carbon credits and so on. So we need to actually build enough capacity in them to be able to manage those finances adequately by doing, for example, or conducting, for example, trainings in areas of beekeeping and other aspects that would help to further strengthen the organization or the management of forestry with CFMGs. And we also need to endeavor to encourage these CFMGs to also form an association where the different numeracy CFMGs may exist, because this would be like a platform where other CFMGs from other countries or from other, not necessarily from other countries, but from other regions of the country can also learn certain best practices and also get encouraged from what is already existing in other countries. So this could also be another area of interest that we can learn from the success story of Gambia and try to ride on that. And basically we also need to ensure that we empower these CFMGs to be able to make decisions themselves, and also realize the fact that community forest management is not a project, but it's an activity that a community can engage in with support from different stakeholders. So they should be able to stand on their own and be able to make decisions within themselves. But this doesn't come easy. I think it still needs a lot of capacity building within the CFMGs. And also, the other practical way that we are proposing is that we reduce the issue of the over-dependence basically on external material and financial resources, because this can drastically undermine sustainability. Once external resources stop flowing through the CFMGs in form of the support that they are getting, either material or financial, it may undermine their sustainability, and we might not see these CFMGs strengthened. So those are the four practical ways that we are proposing, or the lessons that we are proposing that can be learned from the Gambian scenario. We now move on to the Tanzanian one. Tanzania is one of the countries that also has been pioneering the issue of decentralizing forest management at the lowest level. They have taken a different path where I think they have village governments which have the responsibility to look at the forest areas. So they call them village land forest reserves, the VLRs, unlike the way we call them as community forest management areas. But basically the arrangement is the same. So this is one of the countries that has also scored some significant amount of success in terms of rolling out community forest management. And according to some study that was done on the three models that the country is using to actually roll out community forest management, there are quite a number of strengths that were documented to have contributed to the various achievements that the country made based on the assessment of those three models that were done by USAID in collaboration with other institutions. So just like in the Gambia case, one of the key strengths that were identified is the issue of supportive legal and policy structure. I think this cuts across almost all the three success stories that we'll be sharing. So this just come to show that the enabling legal and policy structure actually is very, very critical with achieving the necessary success that is required for us to score in the area of community forest management. And also one key strength that the country rolled on was the long-term partnership with the local community by both government and also the various actors that are engaged in community forest management. So this really helped in ensuring that the communities gain enough ground to be able to stand on their own in managing the various community forest management areas that are managed with the different streams of benefits coming from there. And also there was some kind of direct link between forest protection, sustainable harvesting, and the community benefits. This is very critical in the sense that as we are trying to incentivize or provide in certain areas where communities can benefit in terms of the various benefits, it be the sale of valuable timber products and other products that may accrue from the management of the community forest management areas. It is important that we create that direct link between the protection efforts that the communities are doing and also the incentives or benefits that are coming from the various products, so that the communities are able to continuously conduct the forest protection or management activities and also ensure that there's sustainability in terms of management of forest areas. And also, there was also some strong relationship with government, with the various village land or village natural resources committee, as they are called. So this strong relationship also helped significantly achieving the success. And also support, just like we have in the Zambian the Zambian arrangement, where we have a number of partners coming on board in terms of supporting the CFM agenda. Tanzania also had quite a range of partner organizations that came on board to support the models that were being looked at. Also bearing in mind and understanding that community forest being a social aspect of forestry, we need also to marry it with a lot of scientific grounding. Of course, at the technical level, there is also need to have some strong grounding. So this strong grounding in terms of the scientific information that was generated amongst these models also helped to record a lot of success in terms of the rolling out of community forest management in Tanzania. And the last, but not the least, in terms of the key strengths, is also the high demand for the core products within the three models that were being looked at. So that demand actually created the interest in terms of communities getting engaged in the issue of community forest management. So basically, under the Tanzanian success, this is basically what they considered as the key strengths. So now, what then can we draw from these strengths that our colleagues had actually identified to have contributed to the various achievements in terms of success towards the community forest management? What then can we learn from there as a country and also try to use as practical ways as how we can strengthen our community forest management goal? One of the key important aspects that we can take from the Tanzanian success stories is that we need to see how best we can improve market access and also market share for various forest products from the community forest management areas. This can significantly help to strengthen the CFMGs in the sense that the various products, I think, that are harvested in these forest reserves do not have adequate, or they have market, but the market access that they have does not provide the necessary or the adequate income that these communities need. So that is one way that we feel that can be used to try to see how best we can strengthen these CFMGs. And also we need to sustain partnerships between the CFMGs and other supporting partners in terms of providing support for sustaining the various CFMG activities. We also need to enhance the issue of value addition to the various products. I think we need to see how best at local level the products that are coming from these community forest management areas can be enhanced in terms of adding value to them, for them to fetch a reasonable prices, which can be a good incentive to the communities, and subsequently trickle down to creating more interest for the communities to sustainably manage these areas, because they know that the value of their products are actually fetching good market, and they need to continuously manage those forests for them to continue providing the various products which are available on the market. And the one key area that our colleagues from Tanzania, which we feel we can also ride on, is the issue where a significant amount of revenue was also retained for forest resource management. Apart from just retaining the percentages that the percentages of revenue that was being generated from the CFMGs, there was significant amount of percentage, about 60%, that was allocated to, or that was plowed back to ensure that the forest resource itself is managed sustainably, so that they continue getting the necessary benefits. So we feel that this could also be one practical way that we can strengthen our CFMGs in terms of their operations. And also suffice to mention that within the Tanzanian context, I think there was also some significant amount of percentage, about 5%, that was also retained to the respective districts where these benefits were accruing, just specifically to help also in the issues to do with the forest resource management, basically arising from the 60% that was retained. So this is one practical way that we feel could be also help in terms of sustaining the existence of the CFMGs, because they already have like some resources that they will be using to sustain their daily activities. Mind you, there are also issues to do with the resource protection, where we have the forest, the honorary forest officers that are around, that are actually under the custody of the CFMGs. And if this is done, then we find that the resource protection itself will be enhanced. So then
Sylvester, if you could just speed up, we have just less than 7 minutes.
Thank you, Professor. The last success story basically is the Ethiopian story. And this success story is basically based on the fact that Ethiopia is one of the countries that also has some significant experience with regard to participatory forest management. So I'll just highlight some of the key success areas which have actually contributed to the success of participatory forest management, as they call it in that country, as documented by FAO through their sub-region of the Eastern region. So basically what has been highlighted basically to have contributed to most of the important successes is, one, the collaboration and involvement and continuous follow-up in terms of supporting the various regions and government sectors that were involved in forest management. And also the issue of comprehensive and unified understanding at the various levels, it be at community level and the various levels. I think that comprehensive understanding and unified understanding also significantly contributed to the success of the implementation of PFM in the country. And also, just like our case, Ethiopia also wrote or used the existing traditional systems that we have in the country. We have our traditional leaders that are very helpful in terms of rolling out community forests. So if we use this already existing traditional systems, it could actually contribute to a success, and also recognizing that within the traditional setup, there is also already existing traditional knowledge that we can ride on and also combine with the other scientific aspects for us to have successful implementation of CFM. There was also a strong link between the various income generating activities and forest management, and also the improved market access, like I mentioned in the previous slide. The other component that was also linked to the success of participatory forest management in the Ethiopian case is the issue of enabling exchange of experiences between the various community members that were involved in participatory forest management. So a few lessons can also be drawn from that success story in terms of getting some of the practical ways that we can internalize as a country and see how best we can strengthen our CFMGs. One of them is providing more effort in terms of finding solutions to the financial sustainability of CFMGs. I know this is not an easy task, but if we put in more effort, I think we can see how best we can have these CFMGs have some sustainability in terms of the finances. And also, we can also ride on the sharing of best experiences amongst the various CFMGs and see how best we can create incentives to those CFMGs that, or those communities that are yet to venture into community forest management, and also see how best we can create a linkage between the livelihoods and also sustainable forest management, and also see how best we can put in incentives or benefits that rightfully outweigh the investment that the communities put in terms of managing their forests, which is not also very easy. So basically, these are the key three success stories that we wanted to share. Suffice to say that there are a number of countries that have succeeded in terms of community forest management, but we picked out these African countries just to see how best we can tap in their vast experience with regard to their successes that they have recorded. In conclusion, I just want to emphasize that community forest management is not one model that can be applied universally. Community forest management needs to basically be fitted to the historical and economic as well as cultural circumstances for each particular country. So we cannot take one model, for example, and say this is also can work in Zambia, but we need to see how possible that can be fitted to our economic, social, political, and cultural circumstances within the country. And also, we may also try to learn from the various successes that other countries have made, and also try to see how best we can localize some of the success strengths and also components that have contributed to the success of community forest management in other countries. And lastly, like we saw from the successes that we shared from the various countries, one of the key enabler is the issue of the legislative environment, which can help us succeed. And as for Zambia, we know that we already have this enabling legislative environment, which we can write on. The best way is just to see how best we can also bring in other dimensions that would help to strengthen our community forest management groups further. So this ends my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Many thanks, Sylvester, for that wonderful and very informative presentation. Okay, so we will straight away go into the next presentation, which is coming from Chipata district. Please keep posting your questions, comments on the question and answer panel. Or if you can't, you can still post them on the chat to still catch up with those questions. Okay, so we go straight to a presentation from the district perspective. So this will be presented by Titus Kavonso. He's a technician at Chipata District DFO's office. Titus basically is quite a newcomer in the system, but he has a lot of experience when we were rolling out community forest management, or when we were generating the models under the decentralized forest and other natural resources. So Titus, please, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Titus Kavonso. I'm a forest technician from Chipata District Forest Office, and I'll do a presentation on achieving desired biodiversity conservation results. And this is through effective community forestry. We are going to labor so much to use the field practice perspective. When we are looking at community forestry, in order to achieve community involvement in biodiversity conservation, there are two principles that should come to play. The first principle is control of the area that is demarcated, and the second one is the responsibilities that comes with the demarcated area. So in short, we are saying if these two, the control and also the responsibilities, are added up together, you are going to have secured rights of the benefits. And it's benefiting to note that what government has tried so well to do is to come up with in the national strategy to reduce deforestation and forest degradation is a sustainable forest management. So in short, we are just saying control plus the responsibilities will result into sustainable forest management. Now, this is a poster, or these are the steps that we need to follow when we are doing community forestry. So, sustainable biodiversity conservation through community forest can only be achieved if a quality community forest process has been followed. What this means is these 7 steps are connected. For example, let me take you to step 6. Step 6 is about implementation of the management plans. And also in short, we can be saying this is where controlling access in the demarcated areas, or what we are calling community forestry, is concerned. Now, what this step is all about to control access is so dependent on the quality of step 4 and 5. It's dependent on the quality of the management plans. How has the community forest developed a management plan? What management rules have been put in place? And then also, when you look at step 3, it talks of the constitution and the elections. So when you are implementing the management plans, you realize to say step 3 comes also to play, because in the constitution, that is where the benefit sharing aspect is embedded. That's where what is supposed to be done when there's a conflict is embedded. And when these processes are followed nicely, when there's quality in what is coming out, as in the outputs, then you are assured of a sustainable biodiversity conservation through community forests. So the emphasis on this step, on this poster, is that these processes are interjoined and they need to be followed nicely so that we have a very good quality output. Now, what are some of the field experiences or the lessons that have been learned from the poster? The first lesson that has been learned from the poster is that it's important to always use this poster from the onset of the process, as the highlighted steps forms the basis for achieving desired biodiversity. Let's not forget what we are trying to talk about is how do we achieve a desired biodiversity conservation through community forestry. So it has shown that once this poster is followed nicely, when the quality is up to date, we are not going to have problems. We are not going to have conflicts. And the other lessons from the field is that a translated poster helps out communities to follow through nicely. We need to realize to say, in these communities that we are working with to do community forestry, many are the times that these communities do not understand, or they have limited understanding of English. So this poster has been translated in different languages, and when we are using these translated posters, it helps to own, for the communities to own this process, and this has been seen to be very effective. And the other thing is, in order to achieve a desired biodiversity, there are some of the steps that need to be continuous. It has also been shown from the field that talking about practice, yes, we can do one of the steps, for instance, step 1. Then if we stop doing the sensitization, we can go to boundaries, we can go to forming the constitution, we can go to doing the management plans, doing the management rules, we can start to implement. But then if this process of awareness was not done very nicely, you are going to have problems, you are going to have conflicts. And this has been seen, for example, a field experience of boundary conflicts that arose in a village called Daniel in Chinsali. We realized that there was conflict of the boundaries, and this only was discovered when we were doing step 2. And this was a result of step 1 not being to fully and it not being a continuous process. So it has been seen that these processes should be followed, and then some steps like awareness, even when you are doing step 3, step 1 should be continuous. Now, when we are looking at biodiversity conservation, for it to be sustainable, what should be done going forward, that what has been done, like we have earlier said, these processes should not be rushed. It has been shown from experience that once these processes have been rushed, in future they bring conflicts. In future, the people will not understand and they will not be part of the management of the forest. So these processes should not be rushed, because to achieve enhanced biodiversity conservation, issues of behavioral change are important. And you and me, we realize to say behavioral change does not come in a second. It takes a lot of time. It takes a little bit of time for it to show, to say, okay, fine, we are having that behavioral change. And this behavioral change is what is able to bring sustainability to biodiversity conservation. For example, drawing back from experience from Chipata, community members, they have now changed. For example, we realized to say before CFM, or before reaching step 6, where they have started implementing the management plans, implementing the management rules, there was a lot of total uprooting of trees for medicinal purposes. And now it has been seen that the total uprooting of a tree for medicinal have reduced drastically in Malambalala and Banki CFMGs. These CFMGs are in Kasenengwa district of Eastern Province. There was a lot of back hive constructions in these CFMGs. We realized, and it has been shown from experience, that construction of beehives using the bark of trees have stopped. And this is as a result of the management plans that have started to be in place, and they are implementing them. And when you are looking at all this, this shows behavioral change. And among the other things that we can be assured that there's a sustainability in biodiversity conservation is the adherence to getting payments for different products that have started so far. We have seen that payments is not always that they attract monetary funds, but sometimes, remember, when we are talking about step 6 or controlling access, people should adhere to getting permits. And this has been seen from practice to say there's an adherence to getting permits for different products like mushroom, though this time they are not in season, like for getting firewood for home consumption, all the products that they need for home consumption, there's adherence to getting the permits. Another behavioral change that has been seen in terms of biodiversity conservation is grazing of animals in CFMs. We realized to say there was a lot of grazing in CFMs, which we have seen that experience has shown, and the practical ways have shown that it has reduced, and to some extent it has stopped. Then as we realized to say we are entering, or we are in a period where we are doing early burning, we have seen that there's a behavioral change of where the CFMG, the communities that surrounds the community forestry, are eager and they are ready and they are participating in early burning. And these factors shows that there's sustainability in biodiversity conservation, because people now understand the reason and why they should be managing the forest for their benefit. Now,
okay, Titus,
when we are looking,
Titus,
yes,
if you can speed up your presentation, you have less than 3 minutes to go.
okay, I've just about 2 slides.
Okay.
What has been done to strengthen the capacity to manage the forest? We have seen that chiefs have taken center role to help out with the management of the conflict resolution. Another thing that we have seen that has been done is the HFOs, which they are honorary forest officers that have been put up. And the other to see that these CFMGs are able to issue the receipts, which translate into permits. And these permits, we can see that they have the stamps that they are using. Now, we realize to say there's a sustainable biodiversity conservation. Why do conflicts arises? One of the issues is user groups are excluded. So we have realized to say when user groups are excluded from resource management, it's a source of conflict. And the contradiction between what has been introduced as user rights now and the system that they were using is also a source of conflicts, and also misunderstanding and lack of information about the policy and the objectives of managing the forest, and also contradiction of lack of clarity in local regulation and the access rules and equity in resource sharing. And we have seen, for example, that in Lundazi, there was an issue where, because of the inequity in resource benefit sharing, a chief had installed a CFMG that he was for the idea that he wanted to use as a CFMG executive. Now, what are the arenas or areas where these conflicts arise? It's between the CFMGs and the traditional authorities, between distant forest users groups and local CFMGs, between members of the CFMG as themselves all, and also between the CFMGs and state management, like forest department, where they can be saying they're issuing permits, where the CFMG has jurisdiction, or national parks and wildlife, especially when a CFMG is lying in the GFM. So community forest biodiversity, the local, the control and the responsibilities for these to achieve sustainable forest management, we always need to realize to say the rights and the responsibilities should be at equilibrium. Thank you so much.
Many thanks, Japheth, for those field experiences, mainly from Western Province. And there are a couple of questions already I see in the panel. Okay, so we have come to the question and answer session, and we have 2 panelists, and there are quite a couple of questions which have come through here. So I think the others were answered, but there are a few of them. So in the context, you can also lift up your hand there in the panel. We'll definitely attend to you. In the context of Zambia, is there a lot of community demand for CFM from communities themselves? I think this is an open one. So just note that question. I'll take 3 at a time, then I'll give chance to the panelists. Then the other one, we have observed that a good number of CFMGs are already members of the National CRB Association. What can we do to ensure that we are not duplicating the same efforts by forming another association? So this is mainly for Sylvester. And also, there's a question which is coming from Rolf. Do we really know the cost? What is the cost in the process of setting up a CFM structure? This one I'll give it to Muchinga Province, Provincial Forest Officer. I can see Mr. Nondia online, or Mr. Mpande can answer that, the Lusaka Province. I'm sure data is available for that. Okay, so let's start with the first one. Sylvester.
Thank you very much, Professor. I answered already the question that Andrew asked, but for the sake of others, I just want to say that you may be aware that the CRB is basically, according to my understanding and think, the CRBs are basically located within the confines of the game management areas, whereas some CFMGs are not necessarily recognized through the CRB structure. So now, if we say we use one association, which is the National CRB Association, it creates a big gap in terms of representation for those other CFMGs that are outside the game management areas. Otherwise, if you work around how best this National CRB Association can also have representation from those that the CFMGs that are in the open areas, then it would be ideal to have one association. But as it stands now, what I know is that the CRBs are basically located within the confines of the GMOs, whereas we have CFMGs all around the country, not necessarily in GMOs. So it would be just a matter of trying to see how best we can harmonize these two different local governance structures and see how best maybe these associations can be harmonized.
In terms of demand by the community, is there self-mobilization among them? Is there demand generated by the communities for CFM?
With the sensitizations that we have done so far, we have seen quite a significant amount of demand that is coming out from the communities. Initially, when the CFM was just started through the pilot project that was in Northwestern Land, we had very few communities declaring interest in terms of engaging in community forest management. But with the sensitization and also the publicity coming out through the benefits that have so far accrued and the various livelihood activities that existing CFMGs have shown, we have seen a large spike in terms of interest from the various other institutions that would want to also, I mean, not institutions, but communities that would also want to engage in community forest management. And also, just as I'm on the floor, I just wanted also to answer Rolf's question where I was saying there are a number of, he has noticed that a number of community members, or sorry, forest officers are not buying in the issue of releasing power to the communities to manage, to take up the management aspect. I think that is slowly going down because there was a lot of uncertainties on how we can draw a line between the functions of the forest department and the functions that will be performed by the community forest management groups. So with a lot of capacity building at both the local level and the various levels of the forest department, I think there's been a clear understanding now in terms of what functions will be performed by the CFMGs, and that is slightly going down in terms of those uncertainties.
Okay, many thanks, Sylvester. Mr. Nonde, what's the cost of setting up a CFM structure? Just in under a minute. If you can unmute yourself, please. Hello? Sylvester, do you have an idea how much it costs to put up a CFM structure?
The cost structure would be a bit difficult for me to indicate the actual figures, but I think the initial costs are basically born through community meetings that you actually hold, which are not very specific in number because the engagements and also the responses from the community vary depending on how the community will receive the various aspects of community forest management that you are doing. So mainly the cost is in terms of the movements for the groups that are trying to actually raise awareness and also trying to build capacity in the various steps that Titus mentioned in terms of the steps that we take. So those are basically just generally where the costs come from.
Okay, of course, yeah, that's yeah. But then the expectation as a nation, I think this should be for all of us here, that we must document this so that if somebody asks who wants to start community forest management area somewhere, we should be able to provide the such figures as a nation that it would cost you on average this much if you are dealing with this size of a forest or this size of a community. Yeah.
Yes, you are very right, Professor. Just on the other question, also which Joshua asked with regard to the role of chiefs in the CFM management and enforcement, I think it is important to mention that our traditional leaders have been playing a very significant role with regard to community forest management. And in terms of enforcement, as the community develop their management plans, they also develop rules and regulations that will govern that CFM. So in terms of enforcement by our traditional leaders, they come in handy in the sense that some of the rules that the committees develop at the time of developing the management plans for various CFMs, they also indicate as to who will deal with those offenders depending on the velocity of the offense that is committed. So that's where our traditional leaders also come in terms of trying to see which offenses they can be able to deal with in terms of enforcing some of the rules that the communities actually develop. So that's how the traditional leaders, that's their role actually in terms of
Okay. Okay, many thanks, Sylvester. Mr. Nonda, are you available to unmute yourself now? Okay, as he's trying to unmute himself, there's a question here, a comment actually, but do we have any initiatives in place to ensure that we tap into the young leadership initiative by involving schools or school-going children in the areas where we are promoting community forest management?
Yeah, that can be done at different scales as we are engaging the communities at the lower structures at community level. Normally, when you're identifying, for example, the various user groups, we also take into account that there are certain forest uses that are specifically tailored towards the youth. So we actually try to separate them and deal with the youths separately so that we can get their insights as well. But generally, also in terms of sensitization, there are also deliberate sensitization programs that are done, for example, in schools and also in other tertiary institutions where we try to roll out the various interventions that we are doing generally as in the forest sector, but also we try to put in, we also they take advantage of that to indicate to them that there's also this CFM initiative that we are rolling out as a department.
Okay, so there's a comment. This is coming from Martin. I think it's just a comment. Equity is something that I've learned in a new light. In our CFMG here in Chinsali, the members have opted to go individual as opposed to communal when it comes to accessing benefits from the forest. The problem cited for this is low participation and free riding by most members. And those who are passionate opt to go alone. So this seems to favor those who are more involved than those who are not. And unfortunately, these are just a minority who are doing this. But of course, the bigger question behind that, is it really generating interest among members? There's a question, there's a comment from Tansho. I've seen your hand is up, Tansho, I'll come to you. But there's a question from Joy, who is from Spades. How do you identify the intrinsic incentives that the community will gain and demonstrate this so that external incentives are not needed and the project is sustainable? Have we thought of that? Titus or Sylvester, do you want to go on that?
Yes, like I mentioned in the previous experience that I shared, I think it should be the Tanzanian one where they were saying we need to take into account the issues of the existing local governance structures and also the already existing income streams within the community. So we ride on the already existing livelihoods to see how best we can further incentivize the communities to ride on the existing livelihoods as a way of creating an incentive. But really, it is very, very difficult to actually incentivize the community in such a way that you don't have in the initial stages the support from any other. I think that is a a very big question that we all need to answer in terms of how best can we incentivize our communities. I think Mr. Nonde is speaking, maybe
Hello.
Time to speak.
Oh, yes.
Hello, Professor.
Yes, I can get
Professor,
to now.
technical know-how.
Okay.
There was technical know-how problems here.
Okay, in under
How are you?
a minute, I'm very fine now. In under a minute, we're just trying to find out, you have been long in this CFMG stuff. What is the cost of setting up a community forest management group? The average
The
cost, not...
It's very difficult to give an average cost because there are a lot of factors to consider. And the key ones are the level at which the CFMG is being promoted and the technical know-how of the people who are promoting. If we say the district level staff are able to do all the processes, then the cost will come down. On average, if it is awareness raising, it's just a 2-day or 1-day event. When you come to step 2, step 3, 5 to 7 days. 4 and 5, it's about 7 days. So the numbers of people composed of the team to facilitate the process also matters.
Okay, thanks a lot. So we still have that question around as a nation, but we'll answer it at some point.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I see most of the questions on the panel are being answered, but I'll straight go to Bernard.
My question hasn't been answered. My question.
Okay, you can ask since you have the mic. Then we'll go to Bernard and then Martin. In under a minute, please ask your question. Yeah,
the question was, how do we assist the communities in ensuring that there is sustainable forest resource management and the community benefits? Because we are trying to learn from other countries and the practical ways that we can do it. This question may be directed to Mr. Siame or anyone who is able to answer that and look at that.
Okay, many thanks. I hope you have picked that question, Sylvester. Bernard, what's Bernard? Yeah, let's pick these two, then we can wind up after that. Bernard, please go ahead with your question in under a minute or so.
Thank you, Doc or Prof. I have a question for the Chief Conservator, Mr. Siame. In his presentation, he cited a few examples within Africa, countries like Zambia, Gambia, Tanzania, and also Ethiopia, who have actually implemented the same CFMGs. What we don't know is the resource allocation to the same countries that he cited, the Gambia, Tanzania, and also Ethiopia. Now, in the case of Zambia, since he mentioned to say that CFMGs actually, we shouldn't learn it as a project. Actually, it is enshrined in the current Forest Act. Therefore, we should implement it as an activity of which, if that is the case, it should be implemented within the 10 provinces that we have in Zambia. Now, the question that I have is, the challenges that we are facing, more especially in the forest sector, I think it's the resource allocation to forest department, to be particular, in district level. In an event that we don't have external support like the USAID, maybe other cooperating partners to assist us implement the CFMGs, since we should learn it as an activity, not as a project. Are we able to learn it as forest department without any assistance from cooperating partners, looking at the challenges that we are currently facing in the forest sector in terms of resource allocation? Are we able to implement the activity?
Okay, I think that question has been picked. Do we have the capacity to sustain community forestry management activities in the country? Okay, so Martin. Martin, you can unmute yourself. Okay, so Martin is unable to unmute himself. So we Very quickly, in under 2 minutes, could you kindly handle those questions, Sylvester?
Thank you very much, Prof. I'll start with Tansho's question. Thank you very much, Tansho. That's a very important question. What I would want to say is that community forest management, as you may be aware, is a relatively new concept that we are trying to implement. And what is important is to have this enshrined within the government structure systems in terms of implementation. But I would say for now, I think we still need a bit of support for us to get enough ground as to have it full-fledged supported by internal resources. I think for now we still need a bit of external support in terms of implementation, because it's a relatively new concept, and then we need to also have the capacity to be able to move forward with this process.
Right.
And also for Mr. The PFO Mchinga's question, I think what we need to do from the practical ways that I mentioned is that we need to also link benefits and livelihoods to sustainable forest management in order for us to be able to sustain the management of these forest resources. I mentioned that in other countries, they are already allocating significant amounts of revenue towards the forest conservation itself. Like the Tanzania case where I said there is an allocation of about 60% in one of the models where the community actually allocates about 60% of the revenue they generate from the various activities towards the forest conservation. So if we went that way, that could significantly help us to sustainably manage the forests. And for Mr. Tansho, on a lighter note, I'm not a chief conservator of forest, I'm conservator of forest.
Yeah, we're still getting to learn the titles. Okay, many thanks to the panelists and everybody else who has been actively participating and those who have found time to attend to this. So before I close, I think we have to, but I must mention that there will be proceedings which we shall soon generate for this CFM webinar series. And that will also come along with the question and the answer component in it. So we'll provide answers to those questions which have not been given. And those proceedings will be shared to all, with all the participants to this particular webinar. And just as a way of awareness, we, as the ILRG, we have developed a community forest management manual, and that is part of this process that we are undertaking. And that manual will soon share it as soon as we get some of the necessary signings that we are still waiting for, and that should be done very soon. So without wasting much of the time, we know we are busy, all of us. I want to ask Marty to just say one or two words as a representative of ILRG team. Marty, please.
Thanks, Roy. Really appreciate it. You know, I want to thank each and every one of you for attending these last one or more of the last 4 webinars on community forest management, and indeed the 2 others that we ran on community game ranching and private wildlife estates. If you did miss any of these, they are available on the YouTube channel, and we'll pass that around. You know, as ILRG, we're really here to think about and support coordination and cooperation. Wildlife, forest, mines, and agriculture, you know, all take place on the same land. And I think there's a big risk that we're creating silos of resources and management, and perhaps occasionally creating unnecessarily hurdles for communities. You know, and my own reflection is that this ability of communities to register and enforce their rights to land in the face of domestic, international interests that have really expanded in the past 15 years that I've been in and out of Zambia is important. Community forests give communities the right to register their own land rights. It's really the first way to do that, and it's incredibly powerful. So some of the things I'm hoping that we can advance on are transparency on where the groups are, what lands they're managing, particularly so that investments like USAIDs and nationally through the Forestry Department, that we can support as many as possible. You know, we've really enjoyed hosting these events, and we If any of you as partners are interested in coordinating another event to talk about another issue, whether it's fisheries, additional wildlife issues, additional land issues, in a way that brings together government, academia, communities, civil society, and chiefs, we'd be really happy to work with you. We have a list of about 400 individuals who've shown an interest in this work. It's been a real silver lining of COVID. We used to do this meeting in person, and I imagine we'll do some in the future, but these have been nice ways to get people together. So if you're interested in working with us to host an event, do let us know. We are going to take the next steps, I think, as Roy mentioned at the beginning, of following up with government partners and others to see what we've learned from these events. Are some communication materials lacking? Are there areas of ambiguity or different interpretations where we can all work together so that the 40 of us in this meeting, who I think are all champions of these issues, can speak with the same language. So on behalf of ILRG, just thanks each of you. We will have additional session coming up, which will be on women's land rights starting in August. There's been some really interesting results that we hope to share with you, both from urban areas and rural areas. As a little sneak peek, we do know that women are often left out of community resource groups. And in recent months, we've been supporting elections around CRBs and in a few cases, CFMGs. And we're finding some tools and approaches that are really increasing women's participation. So we hope to share those with you. So on the whole, thank you. Thanks, Roy Chilombo, for running this masterfully over the past 4 weeks. And Roy Chilombo, if you all have any final notes, go ahead. Thanks.
Many thanks, Marty, for those words. And I don't have much to say, just to ask Chilombo if there are any housekeeping issues.
None at all. Thanks everyone for your participation, and look out for an email inviting you to the next sessions that we'll have on women's rights in the next couple of weeks. So thank you so much and see you soon.